Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Ashton. I'm the Director of Communications for the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida. And on behalf of the Foundation's entire board and staff, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us for a conversation about Florida black bears. Before we get going, I want to cover a couple quick housekeeping items. Please double check to make sure you're on mute and remain muted throughout our time today. Toward the end of our hour, there will be a time for questions. At that point, if you want to use the raise your hand feature, I can call on you and you can ask your question directly of our guests. Or if you prefer, you can drop it in the chat at any point. I'll keep a track of those, ask them at the end for you. That feature is also super helpful if you have a question pop up in the middle of the conversation, you want to make sure you don't forget it. So I think that covers all those items. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest. Joining us, Dave Telesco. He's the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's Bear Management Program Coordinator. Dave, I got through that all. Also the Foundation's President and CEO, Andrew Walker. Andy, I'm going to send it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today on one of our continuing series of briefings on Florida wildlife. Appreciate your being here and look forward to your questions as well. A word about our foundation and our support for bear programs. The foundation has been around now for 26 years, and over the last 20 years, we've raised and provided FWC and its partners with about $1.5 million to bring back the population of the Florida black bear. It's one of the great success stories, as Dave is going to be telling us. And a lot of it's been made possible by the sale of the Florida specialty license plate called Conserve Wildlife. This is the new edition of it. It was basically a light blue before with the bear standing. And so you'll see both plates out on the road. And if you don't have one of these plates, we certainly hope you will consider doing so. It not only supports bear conservation, but all other non-game species management in the state of Florida. And it allows us to give away more than $500,000 a year for worthy conservation projects around the state. I'm pleased. I want to thank Dave for also joining us today. And I know this will be a great talk. If you don't know, Dave graduated with a BS in Forestry and Wildlife Resources from Virginia Tech. After graduation, he worked for 4 years in a variety of wildlife projects across the country, and then earned his MS in Wildlife and Fisheries Science at the University of Tennessee. And there it was that he worked on bear population estimation and habitat modeling, and has been with the FWC, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, since 2008, and is the person primarily responsible for ensuring that the Florida black bear continues to recover and that there's sufficient habitat, and that we keep human and bear interactions to a minimum. So please welcome Dave. Dave, thanks so much. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Andy. I appreciate it. So thanks, guys, for inviting me. I'm really pleased to talk about bears with you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we can get started. All right, so again, we're talking about Florida black bear conservation and management, and we'll move forward. So before we get started, I think it's important to go through a little bit of a history to understand how we got where we are today. So how I'm going to explain it is using this curve to help illustrate the changes in the species, how we manage them, what their status was over time. And their story is very similar to a lot of other species of wildlife in the Southeast. You know, they were very abundant before European settlement. So we estimate, based on current densities, that there could have been, you know, over 11,000 bears throughout most of Florida, probably not the Keys, but the rest of Florida. Unfortunately, as Florida was settled, bear populations were overexploited. and not just the bear population, but also the habitat that they relied on. So with little or no management, this resulted in a pretty steep decline in the bear population. So by the 1970s, we considered bears were rare in Florida. There may have been as few as 500 bears statewide. And the good news is that Florida stepped up. They listed them as a state threatened species and gave them protections, not only for the bear, but also for habitat. This also spurred on research to determine what are the threats, what do bears need to do better. And so we kind of moved into this recovery management zone where we kind of just grabbed them right at the tip of disaster and was able to turn that around. So 2002, we had our first statewide estimate using modern statistical methods. And we determined there's probably 2,500 bears statewide. That's a big leap from the 70s. Really pleased with that. And in 2011, all of our state threatened species were revisited and determined were they at risk of extinction or not. And so in 2012, the bear was removed from the state list of threatened species. And so now we're moving into this conflict management stage where the population's rebounded. And the challenge here is that bears are living in areas that hadn't lived in for 30, 40 years. And we're seeing a lot of conflicts with people not really knowing how to live with bears without conflict. So kind of updating it to closer to today, 2015 was our last statewide estimate, and we estimated over 4,000 bears at that time. And so as we move up through this stage, what our hope is that we'll be getting to the sustainable coexistence portion of this curve, where we have bears in good bear habitat, where people live and bears live, people know how to live without conflicts, and they're accepting of the bear population being there. So that's kind of our goal of where we're trying to get to. So this is our current bear range, estimated in 2019, and the darker brown, the more bears, and the more likely you'd see bears. And you could see that the good news here is a lot of connections. These 7 subpopulations that we refer to them were all so separated that genetically you could tell the difference between them. And now they're actually connecting, there's more interchange, and that's really important. And then the other really good news is you're looking at over 4,000 bears covering almost half of Florida. And that's a huge accomplishment given 21.5 million people in Florida, 130 million visitors a year. To be able to have these populations doing so well is very important and impressive to note. So a little bit about Florida black bears. Some people see this picture and they think, that's a mother bear and her cub. Nope, that is an adult male and an adult female. And so, they are going to be different in size. And as they're adults, that's when he's talking about usually a doubling. So where you might have a male at 300, a adult female could be 150 pounds. Of course, we have the exceptions. Our largest male that we are aware of is 760 pounds and largest female is 460. Males actually roam a lot farther than females. They actually have home ranges, not territories that they defend. So you can actually fit more bears in one spot than you would if it was a territorial animal. If it's really good habitat, it's a smaller home range, and if it's not so good, but they can go as far as 135 square miles in a given year. They take a lot more risks. These are the guys that show up in Universal Studios in Miami than the females do. Our females have much smaller home range. The average is 15 square miles. And that's because every other year they have their cubs with them and they have to take care of them for a year and a half. So they're going to want all the good groceries in a small spot to meet their needs. They're more secretive. They don't like coming out in the open. And so that's kind of the big difference between our males and females. Bears look very intimidating. I will give them that, but they're almost vegetarian. 73% of their diet are fruits, nuts, or vegetables. They even graze on grass when the new growth in the spring. 22% are insects. We've all seen Winnie the Pooh guzzle the honey, but the reality is, if you ask beekeepers when bears are most active, it's when there's a lot of bee larvae in the hives. And of course, no one's turning down honey, but that's the big part of their diet, 22% there. And only 5% are animals. And these are typically animals that have been hit by a car, or maybe they play dead, like an opossum. Anything that's going to be easy. We like to say that bears are smart enough to be lazy. And that means that they're about how many calories in versus how many calories out to get that food. So a healthy adult deer running by is not going to get chased. So they eat on average about double what we are supposed to eat each day, 5,000 calories. But now we are in the fall, and they are, believe it or not, trying to eat 20,000 calories a day. And that's because even though we have mild winters, they're still going through that same phase that the northern black bears do up in Canada. And it's because they're going to live off their fat, believe it or not. So to get 20,000 calories, that's 5,000 acorns, or 8.5 large pepperoni pizzas. So you might imagine, because of that, some bears are going to choose to go into a neighborhood and knock over garbage cans. There's a lot more calories concentrated in those garbage cans than it would take to pick up 5,000 individual acorns. So right now, bears are active 18 hours a day trying to put on that fat layer. Now, when you look at a bear, you may think, okay, they have really small eyes, so maybe they can't see well. They actually can see fairly well in color, not as far as we can. They can hear really well, but their number one best sense is the sense of smell. They say that a bloodhound has 300 times the sense of a smell as a human. Well, bears have 7 times the sense of smell as a bloodhound. They can literally smell a mile away. It's how they see the world. So when they walk into a neighborhood, they know 4 houses down on the right, there's leftover lasagna tray in the garbage can. They don't have to go and open it to know that it's in there. And everything about their memory, everything that they know where to go and how to find mates, everything is to do with scent. Now, they're very intelligent. They're also very curious. So if they get startled, they're very likely to stand up. Part of that is also because they walk flat-footed or plantigrade. So they actually walk on 5 toes like we do. They can actually stand and walk a little bit. However, do not believe everything you see on TV. A bear standing is not a bear that wants to come and hurt you. This is a way for them to get a better view or better scent of what's going on. It is not an aggressive posture towards people. And to help you remember that, when squirrels stand up, no one thinks that's an aggressive posture. So just, keep that in the back of your mind. Black bears, unlike brown bears, they're thinking of running away on a regular basis. So fight or flight is the typical reaction when there's a threat, and black bears are thinking flight. 90% or more of the time, it's a wild black bear. They're going to get scared. And for a black bear, climbing up a tree is the same as if they ran away. And the reason why black bears are so flighty is because they grew up in prehistoric times where giant wolves and other bears would try to hunt and eat them. But they had the luxury of having trees and bushes to hide in or climb and run away. Brown bears grew up in open fields in the plains. And so, there was nowhere to run or hide. So they're a little more aggressive in their response to a threat. And you can see here that it does not take much for a black bear to be afraid. That house cat treed that bear twice. And if you're ever bored, go ahead and go on YouTube and look up, house cats chasing bears, and you'll see lots of videos of that. Now, black bear does, let you know if you've gotten too close. Just like most wildlife, if you're gotten too close, they're going to have some way of letting you know. A rattlesnake's going to rattle his tail if you're too close. He's not rattling his tail before he grabs a mouse, there's no point in warning something that they want to get. Same thing here. A black bear that's doing a lot of big movements is trying to warn you to back up. They're not trying to, preface someone getting hurt. So I'm going to show you a video. This is a female who's got cubs up a tree, and this gentleman is filming her. She's going to what we call a bluff charge. So she runs towards a person but stops short. She huffs forcefully through her nose and mouth and pops those jaws. So clicks the back of her molars together. So you're going to see all that. So slow motion, you're going to see she's got her ears back, and she's going to blow that ear and click the jaws. And any animal that's going to turn their back on you is certainly not interested in hurting anybody. So most of the time, people are not foolish enough to actually hand feed black bears. For those that do, we have a law that says you can't do that. Most of the time, it's unintentional. People are just feeding birds, and bears get the birdseed. And a lot of people are surprised about birdseed, but it's actually got a lot of calories. And if you think about it, we have these tractors and pull the seed heads off of these giant fields of plants and put them in a tiny box. It would have taken that bear all day to do that, but we made it really convenient and put in a little box for them. So of course, that's something they're going to want to eat. If you feed cats or dogs outside and leave it overnight, bears are going to come and get that. They don't know that that's a deer feeder in this picture. They just think it's a bear feeder. And unfortunately, they'll usually break it and guzzle all the contents. But if you forget to clean your grill, they will clean it for you, but not as carefully. But our number one thing is garbage. It is plentiful, it is regularly available, and it's stinky. And so that means bears are going to be attracted to it on a regular basis. So almost a full third of our calls are actually bears in garbage. People are specifically saying, hey, there's a bear in my garbage. Another 39% are telling us that bears are in the yard or in a tree or in the area. And so for those, that's another reason. Why are they there? They're there because they're getting attracted because there's food. So almost 70% of the reasons why people call are things that we could control, that we could prevent the attractions from being there. So our policy is emphasizing personal responsibility. We want to make sure that the reason why a bear is in an area is dealt with, not the bear itself, because the bear is just a symptom to an issue. Almost 70% or more of our calls are handled over the phone. We know what the call is about. They're telling us why the bear is there, and we're helping them figure out how to make it so it's not attractive for the bear to be there. And the reality is, in most of Florida, even if we caught that bear and removed it, there's another bear waiting to take that spot. And that's because there's something there that's bringing the bear into your yard. Only 2 to 4% of our calls result in a trapping effort. So, what we tell people is stash the trash and scare the bear. Because if you remove the food, then there's not a good reason for them to be there. And if you scare them off, that's even more reinforcement that being around people is not something they want to do. I think someone's not on mute. So if you guys can just check and make sure. So, the way that we secure trash depends on what kind of trash we're talking about. Commercial dumpsters are actually fairly easy to secure. You can go back to the old days where we have metal lids and metal sliders on the side. Put a clip so the bear can't slide it open. If we've got the more modern dumpster with a plastic lid, you can see here in this picture that it's not very bear resistant. You can actually get plastic lids that have a metal bars installed, and then you just put a security bar over that, and the bear can't lift it open, and they can't collapse it by standing on it. And so I just want to share a clip with you guys, because a lot of folks say, well, how hard is it to keep bears out of trash? Bears are pretty smart. So this is a restaurant in Colorado Springs, and they thought teenagers were stealing their dumpster. So they put a camera up and tucked the dumpster away behind their recycling bin. And they turned out that it was not a teenager. This bear decided that instead of just getting a bag out of the dumpster, they would just take the whole dumpster. Kind of looks like someone shopping at Publix with their buggy. But again, bears are adaptive and they will figure out how to get what they want. Residential garbage is much harder to deal with. It's smaller, there's a ton of cans out there, and it's hard to secure. So what we ask folks to do is keep it secure until the morning of pickup. Keep it in a garage or a sturdy shed. And that way the bear has less time. If it's out overnight, the bears, that's when we have the least activity of human activity. And so bear can actually get into it and they have much more time. If you shrink that time window, it makes it much harder. Most waste companies allow you to secure your cans by just putting like a metal hasp, like a gate hasp on either side, or you can also use straps. We have instructions on how to do that. And that keeps a lot of bears away. It's not bear resistant like a commercial can, but it's better than nothing. You can also build like a little shed or a caddy at the end of your driveway. You can put any kind of can in there. The be all end all, of course, is a bear resistant can. Now, you ask me, what makes it bear resistant? Well, the cans actually get tested by professional break-in artists. These are captive grizzly bears in Montana that absolutely know how to get into things. The video on your left, that's actually Florida black bear. And so before a company spends money to try to get their stuff tested at this facility, they want to try prototypes on our bears just to get a feel for if there's a weak spot they can identify. And basically, once it gets tested, if it handles 60 minutes of contact with a grizzly bear, they actually call it bear proof, which is nothing's really bear proof, but it's certified as bear resistant. Electric fencing, very, very effective for agriculture, keeping livestock safe, bee yards for sure. And we even have solar powered electric fencing now. So really, this is the standard for beekeepers out there. Now, I said bears are attracted to birdseed, and I'll tell you that as most of us, we don't like changing our behavior. And so what we'll tell folks is, hey, there's lots of options. Can you take in your birdseed? No, I don't want to do that. Well, can you put it in at night? No, I don't want to do that. Okay, maybe string it between two trees, at least 4 feet from the tree, and it'll be okay. Well, that does not apply to all bears. This bear in particular was very adamant about getting his birdseed, but I think important to know, right below that bear, you see that post in the ground? That's where the birdseed was. So this bear was coming over and over and over and getting that birdseed easily. And then one day it was like 4 feet higher. And so he's like, oh, that's weird. I think that if the bear never encountered the birdseed accessible and only hung up, he probably wouldn't have tried to get that. The other thing is if you're a hunter and you have a wildlife feeder, just elevate it so that the bear cannot actually break into the contents. They're not going to want to sit and wait for the spinner to speed out a couple of corn. They're just not, it's not worth it for them. So if you can elevate it so they can't get access to the whole contents, that's going to really help. Again, pet food, cats or dogs, it's okay to feed them outside, but feed them outside and then take the food in. You give them an hour or two to eat and then pull it in. And I guarantee you they're going to learn that they have to eat in that hour. They can't just graze and come back and forth. And then clean and secure those grills. That's really important too. So I talked about stash to trash. Now let's talk about scaring the bear. Human dominance goes a long way. People are like, there's no way I'm going to be able to scare that bear. It outweighs me by 3 times, and I'm very afraid. There's no way. But really, it does not take much. Pots and pans banging, clapping your hands, an air horn. For those more persistent bears, we have that thing in the middle is a water scarecrow. That's actually, you stick that in the ground, and it's got an infrared beam. Anything that crosses that beam is going to get a super soaker of water to the face. So it's very effective. And then again, if you have a bear that you're yelling at and it's really not willing to move, follow our guidelines on the web about how to use a paintball gun to kind of reinforce, your voice with that temporary pain. So talk about human dominance. I want to show you what that looks like. This is actually a 350-pound bear in Pennsylvania, and you see what it takes to scare him off.
Let me go in your office because he might come after me.
Get down! Right now! Go! No! No! Down!
So, I mean, I'd run away, you know. So really, you just have to show the bear that you mean it. If you do spend a lot of time in the outdoors in bear country, what we recommend is bear spray. It's $40. It is much more effective than carrying a firearm, and both you and the animal walk away safe. It's not like pepper spray, like personal protection. It actually comes out in a 30-foot cloud, and that bear's got to walk through a 2-foot wide, you know, radius of chemical to get to you. So really, that's a good thing to have. So I do want to point out that while it is extremely rare, we have had 28 incidences where we know a bear has made physical contact with people since we've been recording this since the 1970s. Of the 28 instances, 13 resulted in serious to moderate injury in people. Now, all of these have happened in 2006, since 2006, and that just, you know, there's nothing special about 2006 except that the number of bears and the number of people on the landscape kept increasing to a point where there's going to be just more chances of the interaction. Most of these have occurred north of Orlando, in and around Ocala National Forest. About half are female bears with young, and we're seeing this throughout the country where females with young start getting used to being in the neighborhood, but then something triggers them to be defensive. And honestly, a lot of it's a dog. You see somebody walking by, she seems to be okay with that, but they're walking by with a dog, and now all of a sudden she's going to be defensive. Unfortunately, just over 40% are intentional interactions. Now, no one intends to get hurt by a bear, but we did have a person get swatted in the face when they were hand feeding chicken to a bear. And then another gentleman, the bear was going after his hog, so he hit it with a post and the bear turned around and hit him. So these are intentional things that we could avoid. What are you supposed to do? Well, it depends on the bear. A lot of people think, okay, if it's a bear, I play dead. It definitely depends on the species. First things first, do not run, no matter what species we're talking about, because bears actually, as slow as they appear, they can actually sprint 35 miles an hour. So you're not going to be able to outrun them, and you actually could trigger a chase instinct. Stay together, look big. That goes for both. But if they actually are going to try to hurt you, for a black bear, you fight back, and for a brown bear, you lay down. Well, we have 40 states with black bears and only 4 with brown bears. So most of the animals that you're going to encounter are going to be black bears. So we talked about what you guys can do as residents, what we can do as an agency. Well, local governments can help as well. They can pass a local ordinance or a law that says, hey, this is important. We all need to do the right thing. And it's the same thing as, like, you know, if you're in a flood zone, there's certain things you can or can't do. You're in a bear zone, there's certain things you probably should or should not do. The nice thing is you don't have to explain how. You just say garbage has got to be secure. However you want to secure it is up to you, but it has to be secure until the morning of pickup. And we have 5 counties and 3 cities and lots of homeowner associations who have passed these ordinances and seen really dramatic drops, up to 90% decline in conflicts, just by having this community-wide effect of people understanding this is important to keep bears from getting attracted to their neighborhoods. To help this process, we have provided almost $2.1 million to local governments in the 16 counties in Florida that have the most conflicts. A lot of these are bear-resistant cans, but we also have passed out thousands of sets of these hardware to make it harder for bears to get in, but dumpsters, sheds, even electric fencing. Most of the funding has gone to ordinances because we know that's going to make the biggest effect. And I really want to point out here that a big chunk of that money came from the foundation. The Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida provide $680,000 specifically for Bearwise funding efforts to help folks secure their trash and not have issues with bears. And so Andrew kind of talked a little bit about this. I want to go into a little bit further is the conserved wildlife tag is not the bear plate. We call it the bear plate. It's not the bear plate. For the manatee plate, all that money goes to manatees. Panther, all that money goes to panther. For the conserved wildlife tag, yes, there's a bear on it, but it's to contribute to the health and well-being of Florida black bears and other wildlife diversity. That's what the statute said when it was created in 2000. So really an average of 23% of funds go to bears. All the rest are going to a lot of other species that are really in need of help and conservation. Some good examples of how we've used this for bears. We created the Bear Response Contractor Program. These are private citizens who can help us with responding to conflicts. We also use it to orphan, for orphan cubs. We can rehabilitate them, release them in the wild. They've helped us with research, getting our population estimates, and also determining what methods are the best to scare bears and kind of reinstill that fear of people. And there's some real benefits working with the foundation and their grant program. It allows us to try new techniques. No other state has private citizens that they have trained to help respond to conflicts. Without grants and continued support from the foundation, we wouldn't have been able to do it. And once we showed the state, the agency, that this works and is successful, we were able to lobby and get funding internally to pay for the Bear Response Contractor Program. And now we rely on it regularly. Again, this cost sharing of bear resistant equipment. Before the big grants started coming in 2015 and 16, we had smaller grants from the foundation, and that laid the groundwork. So we knew how to do this when larger funds came in from the state. Critical research gaps. There's only so much funding that's out there. And if it's like pushing us over the edge, hey, can we have a little bit more funding? The grants are there to help us find out how many bears we have, what's female survival. All of that is supported by the foundation. So with that, I'm really happy to be here to answer any of your questions about Florida black bears. And I'll stop sharing.
Great, Dave. Thank you so much. So if anybody, I haven't seen, oh wait, we just got, somebody was giving us an update on a bear sighting in Naples. But if anybody has questions, go ahead, either send them in the chat and I can ask them to Dave for you, or if you want to ask them directly, use the raise your hand feature and I can call on you and we can unmute and ask a question. So I'll give everybody a.
Yeah, so Jeannie Jane is asking about a bear in Naples, and we are aware and have sent a biologist. We've got a bear that's been injured pretty severely, so he is actually probably there now.
Oh, great. Thank you, Dave. Any other questions?
I was that good.
Very thorough. Dave.
Miss Barber, you got a question?
I do, thank you. I'd like to know, do bears mate for life, and do they stay in the same geographic area when they grow up?
Great questions, and they do not mate for life. They're actually, how it works is, I talked about home ranges in the beginning. So they have overlapping home ranges. So where one male is one day, as he moves out, another male might be there the next day. So actually have multiple males using the same area, same as females. They just don't overlap at the same exact time. But a male will breed with multiple females, same thing with a female. And so, but as far as do they stay put, they actually, once they've established their home range, they do stay. So usually when a bear is about 5 or 6 years old, where they are is where they're going to stay. They're not going to move. Now, seasonally, they may move. And how it works is the female has cubs. Usually it's about 1-to-1 male to female. Her male cubs have to leave, because if a dominant male comes, he'll actually try to kill it. But a female, her young, can actually adopt part of her home range or nearby. So if you actually went into a population, a lot of the females are related. So it'd be like the daughters and the mothers are fairly nearby. And that's why it takes so long for them to expand their population, because the females just kind of bump over a little bit here and a little bit there. The males are the ones that are ranging pretty far.
Great question. Thank you so much. We had one come in, Dave, that they're asking if you could take everyone through how development is being managed in Collier County versus wildlife. There's been a couple of questions just about bear habitat in Florida, particularly. Sure. Just if you could maybe just give an overview of bear habitat, that'd be helpful. And if you want to touch on Collier County.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think this is it's counterintuitive. Let's put it this way. Now, bears are habitat generalists. So there's certain species, like let's say red cockaded woodpeckers, they need a very specific type of habitat. They don't have it, they're going to be in trouble. Bears, if it's really thick and you can't see through it, they like it. Also, if they got to walk through a neighborhood every once in a while, they're okay with that. So they're very accommodating and adaptive. The other counterintuitive thing is, how do we have so many more people and so much more development, and yet the bear population keeps going up? That's because they're accommodating. They're spreading out from where they are now, and they're actually going into areas that we wouldn't consider bear habitat, and they're kind of like, this will work. So they're doing well. How we interact when it comes to development is we get commenting, we're ability to comment on land. And so when someone's going to change a land use, they say, well, how's it going to affect wildlife? And we go through a list of all these different species and what their needs are and what it might affect. And so, critical areas that are connecting populations, that's something we say, look, this portion needs to be in conservation because, that's a link. For bears, it's not as bad because bears, they're like, okay, I guess I'll cross over here. Where some animals actually need that continuous forest. But we're very fortunate in that we work really well with Department of Transportation. Every time they're going to look at doing a upgrade on a road, they check with us and see, have we had a lot of incidences of wildlife collisions, and should we put an underpass in? Should we fence it? A lot of good interaction there. And like I said, counties, they're in charge of the development that happens, but they reach out to DEP, and DEP reaches out to us to see how is this going to impact wildlife and how can we either change it or mitigate any sort of those changes.
Thank you so much, Dave. We on that topic, Ben was talking about the importance of prescribed fires, and if you have anything to say about fires and impact on bear habitat.
Absolutely. It's a lot of folks think that the prescribed fire is bad, and I think the where that comes from is partly Smokey the Bear. Thanks a lot for that very effective marketing campaign. But also is that when you see prescribed fire, it looks like the landscape is devastated. But the reality is so many of our habitats need that prescribed fire to be productive and to do really well. And I mean, it doesn't take bears long to come right into that recently burned area and check it out and see what's been exposed, because now there's not undergrowth. And then the new growth that comes up is perfect for them. So they move throughout their habitat. They're very wide ranging. And so as something's burning, they move out and they move right back in. We even have, a lot of evidence at our dens that they move out, the fire's over, they go right back in. So this is something that it's for the health of the forest, includes the health of the bears. And they're used to fires from lightning and Native Americans. So this is just, we're trying to mimic what they're used to.
Thank you so much. So there's a question from Stephen asking if you have any specifics on how far a bear can swim.
Yeah, believe it or not, if a bear can see the land on the other side, they'll try. And they have to obviously have a reason to do that. But we'll see them regularly, swim in the Gulf. It's typically males. Females with cubs don't usually do it. But they will cross if there's, a minor water body that they want to get from one area to another. Sometimes the bears will jump on mom's back. Other times they'll swim it themselves. But it's usually the males are doing a lot of the swimming, and they're giant paws. So it's like really big oars out there in the water. But yeah, we'll see them do that.
Great. So Bruce has asked a number of really good questions. I'm going to throw all three at you at once, Dave. Wondering about if motor vehicle accidents are a major problem for bear mortality. He's wondering what happens to bears that are trapped. And then he's asking about if there's a difference between Florida black bears and other black bears.
Great question. So yes, motor vehicles are a major source of mortality for bears. While some states hunt, our bear population is getting hunted by cars. An average of 230 bears a year are hit by cars. Now, where the most of them, over half, are getting hit by cars in the Ocala population, which is the largest population. So in that way, that is dampening how much that population is growing. So just as an example, the Ocala population is growing at an estimated 2% a year. You go to an area that is not having that kind of mortality, it's growing at 15% per year. So it's not causing that population to decline. It's just preventing it from growing as fast as some of the other ones. What happens to bears that are trapped? So we normally trap bears when it has escalated to the point where we're afraid for public safety. About 40–50% of the bears we catch, we actually have to put down. But the other bears, honestly, we're trying to catch, say, a large male, and we catch a small female. We let her go. That's not one we're trying to catch. So when you think about how many bears we're catching versus how many bears we're putting down, also our success rate is about 50–60%. So just because we want to catch a bear doesn't actually mean that we're going to catch one. And then about the differences between Florida black bears and other black bears. So there's 16 subspecies of black bear in the United States. In the East, there's only 3. There's Florida black bears, Louisiana black bear, and American black bear. If you just look at them, they're all in a room, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But you look at their skulls, and certainly their genetics tells us that they've been separated enough that we can now tell the difference between them. They can interbreed, so that's not an issue, and because they're a subspecies, not a different species. But it'd be very hard to tell the difference between a black bear just physically.
Great questions, Bruce. Mike is asking a question I'm sure you get a lot, Dave. He's wondering if there's a time if there's a number in the population at which a bear hunt would be considered again.
Yeah, so for those of you who are not aware, we did have bear hunting all the way up to 1994, and then we had a bear hunt in 2015. And basically the commissioners, FWC commissioners, were run by a commission just like most state agencies. They have said in 2019, hey, hunting is an option. We may or may not use it at some point. And that's where it is. There's not a magic number. Our populations in most areas could sustain a hunt. So it's not a question of how many bears. It's just a question of if we choose to do it. And that's up to the commissioners.
Great, thank you. Bruce has another great question. If he wanted to take to hike in a place with the best chance of seeing a bear, where would that be? You mentioned Ocala. Would that be a recommendation?
Ocala National Forest has the highest density, not only the highest number, but the highest density. They have the smallest home range because they can get all the groceries in one small spot. So Juniper Springs, there's just honestly, Ocala National Forest in general is a really good spot for it. But we've got 3 really large populations. So Big Cypress National Preserve has over 1,000. Ocala National Forest has over 1,000. Apalachicola has over 1,000. But with Apalachicola National Forest, you'd actually want to go to Tate's Hell State Forest, which is south of that. That has more bears than Apalachicola does. And then there's Osceola National Forest. While there's only 500 on the Florida side, there's 800 on the Georgia side. So that's another very large population. Great. And I will tell you this, when they're behaving, you're unlikely to see them. They're behaving, they don't want to see you, they can smell you a mile away, they're hiding. So honestly, the times that I've seen wild Florida black bears is when I'm driving, unless they're in a trap. It's very difficult.
Great. Breyer's asking a question about seeing reports in the news about male bears seen in populated areas apparently looking for mates. Is that because corridors between living areas have been compromised, that they have to do this to find a mate?
No, what's going on is we have in the spring, that's when the family unit breaks up. As I mentioned, that the males have to leave because it's breeding season. So what ends up happening is we have some established males, but also a lot of young males. They just wander around and they're looking for a place where they're not going to get beat up, and they might be able to find a female. And so they end up in like Miami and Tampa and Jacksonville and all these cities that they're like, what the? So, you know, this happens. It's a very normal process. And then they find their way out. Almost all the time, we do not have to help them. But it's not because there's not a place. It's because they're trying to leave where they started out, because they're thinking there's got to be a greener pasture over the hill kind of thing. And they find themselves in traffic. And then that's like a problem. So.
Well, that leads into our next two questions. We have Terry and Shannon both asking about the wildlife underpasses or overpasses.
Mm-hmm.
They're wondering, Terry's wondering if bear and panther teams ever work together on conservation and particularly underpasses.
Mm-hmm.
And Shannon's asking specifically about if there are any plans for one near Ocala National Forest.
Yes. So how FWC is structured, I'm actually in the same section as panthers. So I'm in the same section as manatees, sea turtles, panthers, and bears. That's ours. So we work together a lot, and where bears are getting hit is likely where a panther might get hit in the future as panthers expand their range. So we work very well together and closely. The thing that we're working on now, which I'm pretty excited about, is looking at where animals are getting hit and seeing where the nearest bridge is, and seeing, can we make that bridge a de facto wildlife crossing by fencing it? So it depends on how tall the bridge is. Is it over water, or is some of it not water? Could we build that up? So we're actually working with the University of Central Florida right now for statewide, looking at where can this happen. In the meantime, what we do, for bears at least, is every 5 years we do what's called a hotspot analysis. We figure out where are most of the bears getting hit, and then we send that to DOT. And they look at, are there crossing signs? Is there a bridge? Are we going to improve that road anytime soon? If so, that's where we want to put an underpass. So we are actively working with them on a regular basis. And I'm really pleased that this bridge idea might take off, because, you know, if it can coincide or at least close enough, there's no need to try to spend, $4 million on an underpass when we can just fence an existing bridge. So that's the process we're working on now.
Great, thank you. It looks like, does anybody else, we have about a little over 5 minutes before we need to start wrapping up. I'm not seeing any, Megan, I'm going to send you a direct message to address your question. But I'm not seeing any other bear related questions right now. So, here we go. So Josh is asking about 50% of trapped bears are euthanized.
Sure.
He's wondering what that means in terms of an actual number.
Yeah, so it varies anywhere from 20 to 30 a year on average. A really high year, I think the highest year we ever had was 116. That was in 2015. But it's typically more like 20 or 30 bears a year.
Great, thanks, Josh. Dave, getting lots of thank yous and great presentations. So I'm going to say that out loud.
Thank you.
See. All right, guys, we have a couple more minutes if you have any last questions. Otherwise, we could wrap up here soon. Dave, while we're waiting, have there been any other things that have popped up for you that you wanted to make sure we addressed today that we haven't covered so far?
Actually, interestingly enough, Jeannie Jane had asked about Naples. We just had a bear with a jar stuck on his head. And this is the 4th time in 10 years that we've had bears with jars stuck on their heads. And these are the Sam's Club or Costco cheese ball containers, the big plastic ones. The first 3 were cubs, and they actually had it fully stuck all over their head, past their ears. Fortunately, we were able to catch them and take them off. In this case, it was an adult animal, and fortunately, it was only on their snout and up past their cheekbones. And everything we can tell, it seems like he has been able to get that off. We are no longer getting sightings of him, but we're getting sightings of bears in that area. So that's good news. But again, it's kind of one of those where exposed garbage, that's one of those weird things that can happen. So keep that secure.
We had a question from Mike to answer your question. Our next topic, our next Zoom conversation with an FWC biologist, we're going to be talking about deer in November. That is November 9th. You'll receive a email with the information the same way we sent it out here. If you're not currently subscribed to our email and you got the information for today's meeting another way, you can go on our website at the very top. It says join our newsletter, or just drop me an email. My email is on our website on the contact us page. Our website's wildlifeflorida.org. We're also recording today's conversation, and we'll share it out over eBlast 2 in case you wanted to review any of Dave's slides or watch the bear shopping video again, which is my personal favorite. Or if you have folks you want to share this with, we'll be sending the recording out as well. So I think, Dave, that looks like we don't have any questions. I'm going to give everybody one more minute to get any last questions in, and then otherwise we can say good afternoon. Andy, did you have anything come up for you that you wanted to say before we sign off?
No, I just want to thank everybody again for participating, and Dave for putting together such a great presentation. And yeah, I've already been showing my family various photos and videos that you had in that. They're quite good. And I made a note to go on YouTube and look for more. So thanks again, all of you. We so appreciate all you do to support the foundation and conservation. And don't forget the new license plate.
Yeah, I want to echo Andy's thanks to everybody for their excellent questions and for spending an hour out of your busy day with us, and to Dave for your time and very thoughtful presentation and answers to some really great questions. To Andy's point, if you're interested in buying the new license plate, you can also now do that on our website, which is new, to be able to place the order online. So you can find all that information online. If you have any questions, again, feel free to send me an email directly, and I'd be happy to help. Dave, it doesn't look like we have any new questions come in, so I think we can say good afternoon.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Really appreciate the interest and great questions. Thanks,
Thank you
Andy.
all.
Thanks.
Ciao.
Bye.